Hello, everybody. This is Lynn Fraser with the Kilby Center for Recovery and the Radical Recovery Summit. And I'm really pleased to be here today with Dan McLintock. He's a person who's been around the Kilby Center for a long time as a staff person and as a client. We've had a long connection of many years now. And I also facilitate the Kilby inquiries, which he was part of with Scott Kilby of developing. So I'm really happy to have you here, Dan. And I know we're going to have an interesting conversation. So, what would you like to say in terms of just kind of introducing yourself and how you got where you are now? Big question.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here with you too. And it's funny, maybe the beginning of it was I actually did my first session of inquiry with you, and and you were the one that said, why don't you try the Gilleby Center? Why don't you head out there and work on the trauma that's coming up for you? That was 2015, I think, 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Just a quick background: I was raised in Jacksonville, Florida, in the 1980s, and I was raised by mom and dad both who had alcoholism and addiction and codependency and
Mm,
trauma up both sides of their family, right? So that's what I came in with. And that started to really show up for me like in my early 30s or so,
hmm
like really deeply started to. And I was having PTSD symptoms. I'd be at work and would be shaking and just real reactive to people and jumpy and all this stuff. I'd also been in, mention this, so I've been in 12-step Al-Anon programs like that for probably about 10 years, just because I knew that there was the family effects of alcoholism that was in me. I could tell.
hmm hmm
I also grew up in church, and church environment, not too fundamentalist or strict or anything, but had the church piece, had the 12-step piece, and then I had the ancestral trauma, right? The alcoholism and the addiction and stuff. And so I started to have this feeling in my early 30s where I was like, I think there's something like in the way. There's something that's like um, something that I've taken on that's like in the way is what it felt like, and it's blocking me. There's something that's in me that is blocking me from actually like being present and living and all this stuff. And so that's why people like Scott Kilby and Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie and Adyashanti and all these folks like really appealed to me because they were saying, well, there is something in the way,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and they called it the ego, and it goes by a bunch of different names. But yeah, I just resonated a lot with their work and had been following Scott for a while, his videos and everything. And so yeah, I went to the center. I spent 90 days there and just began the process of sort of dismantling that thing that was in the way, the ego or the
hmm
pain and the trauma and the beliefs and all this stuff wrapped up into one. I started to dismantle it as a client at the center. And at the end of my time there, they invited me to come back and work. So I did, like the next month, and I headed out to California and worked there for 2.5 years, and didn't just work at the center, but also became close with Scott, became friends with him, and like he invited me to develop the sort of where he was evolving the work to next, which is what we call now the Killaby inquiries, and what I like to call deprogramming. And he calls it that sometimes too, but that's what it feels like to me. Just because I keep working with it. It's like a progressive, like, undoing of all that stuff I mentioned, the church stuff, the familial stuff, the 12-step stuff, just undo, undo, undo. That's sort of where I'm at now, is I'm continuing to develop that with him and work with people, doing sessions with people. And I've just started to train folks too in the process of uh, deprogramming and teaching them, how to do that using the Killaby inquiries. So
Right. Right. What an interesting journey.
yeah.
The programming goes so deep that we really need a deep process to address it and to reveal it so that we can see it. Yeah. So I want to get to the Kilby inquiries in a minute, but first I wanted to talk about the drivers of addiction, the way they've been developed at the Kilby Center over the last 3-4 years. How do you see those? There's trauma, there's external pressure, those kind of those drivers that we talk about. What would you say about those?
We identified them as trauma, shame, deficiency stories, external pressure. There's a number of them, but I think I mean, that's what I would call the programming. I know I keep using the terms, but that's what I would call that, is that there's this mass of sort of beliefs and of experiences that that are stuck in our system. You know, it's like beliefs that, and then somatic pain showing up. That there's emotions and there's sensations that get like stuck in the body. Yeah, our approach is that we go right for that stuff. That it, you know, when we're dealing with addiction, that we try to go right to that and start to dismantle and undo and deprogram that, and let people work through the trauma and work through those and undo those beliefs. And, you know, and then as they do, whatever the addiction was, because the addiction just shows up, you know, I think it's like a, you know, Gabor Maté has said this and tons of people, but that it's really just like a, coping, it's a soothing or a coping mechanism. You know, it's the way, it's kind of a messed up version of self-care. You know, it's like what kids learn when they get this pain in place, and it's like, oh, well, maybe, you know, they find alcohol, or maybe they find um, drugs or sex or other people, codependency, you know, and they can, you know, and that makes it temporarily feel better, you know. So
Right.
yeah, it's going right for the drivers and starting to address it there feels a lot more like straight to the point, you know, instead of like getting caught up on, well, the problem is the behavior, the problem is the using or the drinking or whatever it is. It's like, well, no, that's, let's just call that the solution, basically. You know, it's like
Yep.
that's what has helped this person get by, you know. And so to stigmatize that, or to judge them, or to even to set rules and go, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, is not good. You know, it's like this person basically needs that for a period of time.
So the Kilby Center is a primarily mindfulness-based treatment center, the first in the US. So it's a non-12-step program.
Hmm.
Most people that come to the center probably have 12-step experience.
They do, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they do. And I had a lot of 12-step experience, and that's part of my recognition about myself, was I went, well, I think some of that 12-step experience had been lodged in my system in a way that where it was starting to cause more harm than good.
Mhm.
The beliefs around it and the identities that came with it, you know, like I'm an addict, or the rules, this stuff.
Mhm.
We actually include that in the process of deprogramming, right? It's like, let's take what you learned when you were out there using or drinking or acting out or whatever, let's take that apart, but let's also take apart the stuff that you picked up and learned in those programs, because belief and really rigid sort of rule based, you know, systems feels like that's what the problem is in the first place. You know, that's what gets like locked into people early on. That's the pain. So to try to solve that pain with the same thing is like, no, no, no.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
Um, so, yeah, it's one of the, I was doing a session with somebody a couple of days ago who had a lot of 12-step conditioning and had been in and out of AA, and a lot of the had taken on that alcoholic identity, right? I'm an alcoholic, and that means I can't drink, or if I do, I'll never be able to stop, and da da da
Right.
da. We'll start with those folks and say, okay, let's look at that programming. And the way that we do that is we say, try this, and see if when you say this, what it brings up in the system, if the body reacts, or, you know,
Mhm.
and we'll say, I can have a drink whenever I want. Right?
The
And then
radical.
that, it is. And it's so, and it's not encouraging the person to drink. It's not, you know, it's just saying, let's see. We're basically like Scott says, we're picking a fight with the ego, right? We're going, I can have a drink whenever I want. And the whole system goes, no, I can't, because this belief, this past experience, this, da, 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 right? And these words and pictures start to show up, and we're going, that's the material, right? Let's start to deprogram and undo that stuff. And as people do, it's pretty wild. Like if somebody's really, and this of course is if the person is willing to do this. Some people, I really believe some people need that rule based system, and the old, we call it the old model of recovery, where it's like abstinence, don't, you know, if the
Right.
person wants to stay there and that's working for them, that's fine. But if somebody like myself or some of the other folks I've worked with wants to get clear of that, then we'll dig into it with them. And as we do, the desire to drink kind of starts to fall away. And even if they do drink, there's not a lot of like um, self attack, self judgment, aftermath, you
Mhm.
know,
Shame being one of the big drivers.
shame. Yeah, exactly. And and a lot of times if the person does have a resumes use or has a relapse or whatever, a lot of shame comes up and we're like, oh, goody. Let's dig into that and let's undo that because that's part of what's driving the whole thing to begin with.
Right. Can you talk a
So,
little more about that? What kinds of things have you seen come up when people get start digging into that shame?
yeah, it almost reminds me of like what I've heard about exposure therapy. It's like, well, I'll just give you this an example from my experience. Like I dealt with porn addiction and sexual issues and stuff, and so when I got to uh, when I got to the center and started working with Scott, he was like, "Okay, let's have you go and be expressed sexually. Basically, let's let you go
Right.
do that and see what comes up afterwards." And I was terrified, of course, to do that because I had all these rules and ideas about I shouldn't, and if I do it means this about me,
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
you know. And
Mhm.
Scott went, "Well, that's the goods. That's it right there. That's like what we want to get into." And so I do it, and I just have a shame spiral. It's like he's like, "Okay, go do it," and then come back to me the next day and just I come in with my head down and just like he's totally going to be
Yeah.
disappointed in me or he's gonna say get out of here or whatever. And I come in, there's zero judgment. It would almost even be like encouragement, like, oh, this is great that this is up. Let's like look and see what this is, you
Right.
know. And that was a new world for me because I'd been conditioned for so long by, of course, society and the church and old ideas, puritanistic ideas about sexuality and stuff. And
Right.
then, of course, I had my own judgments and myself, my own programming would like attack me every time I would do it, keep me in that cycle.
Right. Right.
So yeah, and as we did it, it's like the shame, I would go through with it and then the shame would come up and I would inquire into the shame and into the story about the
About your
deficiency story, what it meant about me that I had done this. And then I would find that the periods of time between binges or between acting out would get longer and longer, and there would be less and less of a desire to do it.
Mhm.
And we did that for probably a year and a half or so, and it was wild. The transition was just, uh, you know,
So I imagine a lot of things came up from things that were unrelated to the acting out, things from your past, because it kind of opens that doorway. Shame is a big, and it's an effect of trauma, and we internalize things, we personalize things, we feel like we're bad. And
yes,
so when you were doing that shame work around that, was that a doorway into kind of releasing shame from all different periods of your life, your childhood, different periods as well?
yes. I had a really specific um, memory come up of being in the house church community where I was probably 4 or 5 or something. And I came down the stairs and I was standing on the landing of the stairs and I was listening. And there was a group of people in our living room that were there that were the part of this Christian community. And they were all talking the biblical stuff and Christ and unconditional love and all this. And I remember I was on the landing and I was listening to them and I thinking to myself, wow, what they're talking about in there sounds really good. It sounds great. You know what I mean? And I really think that's awesome. And I can feel the suffering, anxiety, trauma, I didn't know what to name it then, but I could feel that they were just all miserable,
Uh,
you
right.
know? And so I just had this real specific memory where I went, okay, so either I join in that and pretend with them, or I'm by myself and you know, I'm alone. And so that's that moment of like identify choosing attachment over authenticity, right? And at that point, it was like I have to, I got to go along with this to survive because I can't. It's too painful to just be alone over there and just be,
It's a survival level threat, especially at that age.
yeah. And
Really, at
so
any age, we see that play out in our society all the time.
I agree totally. I mean, I've heard people say that it's like a culture of that. There's like a culture of self betrayal. It's like we're taught or programmed
Right.
to
Yeah.
start to betray ourselves and not show up and go along with and farm out, or abdicate our power to other people and farm it out.
Mm.
And so yeah, I did starting then and then on, like little by little started to like betray myself, give my power away until I got to the point, like I said, I was in my early 30s where I didn't, I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore. You know,
Mhm.
it's like the programming had taken over and was pretending to be me now. And I'm going,
Right.
what the hell is happening? And it was taking me to, you know, addictive stuff. And it was taking me to people pleasing. And it was taking me to all this. And I'm sort of in the passenger seat going, okay, it sucks,
So your programming is in your relationship with someone else's programming, but there's no real connection and intimacy there. Yeah, that does suck. Yeah. So let's talk about the structure. I love the structure of the conditioning on one side, the freedom on the other side. Talk about how you develop that and what does that mean? How could people work with that structure?
Yeah, the left and the right. Yeah.
Mhm.
This is like, it happened organically. It was wild. And actually happened after I left California and moved back to Florida. I heard Adyashanti talking about how if we're talking about real, genuine sort of awakening and like coming back to our true nature, deprogramming, whatever we want to call it. These are all just terms and concepts for it, but it's like he's talking about that process, and he said it's like it is like you're leaving the tribe, you know?
Uh,
And he said it's like you're leaving it, and that there's this gravitational pull that when you leave, it's like internally there's this stuff that pulls you back. There's resistance that happens because it's like, no, no, no. There's all this conditioning and program that's tied up and entangled with them. And then not only that, but there's also when you start to leave and move away from that, people don't like that. You know what I mean? It messes with their paradigm and it messes with their
mm,
worldview. So there's also this like energy of them being like, don't you dare, you're not allowed, or what you're doing is bad or dangerous or whatever. So I actually started to see that. I heard him talk about that, and I started to see that happen in my own relationships, in my
mhm.
family, with friends, with even with some folks within spiritual communities and stuff. And so I just started working with folks and going, okay, whoever you feel that there's an attachment with, or that you're suffering around,
Mhm.
the person that's triggering you to suffer, you feel tethered or attached to that person or those people, put them to the left, put them over here. um, and it's part of the process is you stay with them and you just feel what comes up as you witness this person or these people doing their thing, and that's how you identify the beliefs and the trauma that is hooking you in or tethering you or attaching you to them, right?
Mhm.
And then you inquire into that, so it's almost like you're snipping the cords, you're like cutting the tethers or whatever.
Mhm.
And then and that's also the deprogramming, right? So I'm undoing the programming little by little. So as I do that, it's like there's a natural movement of migrating from that consciousness, because this is egoic consciousness on the left. This is, I mean, everybody knows what it's like to be in that kind of soup of
Yeah.
suffering, right? Where it's like I feel I have to diminish myself. I have to take care of other people. They need me. I need them. I need to suffer with them. They need to suffer with me. They need to beat me up. I need to let them beat me up. Just whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
ugh. That's the ego consciousness. And so there's a movement as you start to like break away from that to where you return to unconditioned awareness or unprogrammed awareness. And so I went, okay, well, if that's on the left, then let's put unconditioned awareness on the right, and come over here and just rest now without these beliefs that you've just dealt with the inquiry, and just come over here and just, what would it be like? Byron Katie would say, who would you be without the thought? Who would you be without the program, without the strategy, without the belief, without the, you know, and just rest here, you know? And I started doing that myself, and I was like, wow, there's a real, palpable like difference. It's like when I'm resting here versus when I'm like hooked in and, believing this stuff, most of which the stuff I'm believing came from, I almost would say all of it really came from that consciousness, came from the love, came from the egoic uh, consciousness, right? So it's like all secondhand information. And that's what I tell people when we start looking is I'm like, go ahead and just start assuming that nothing that you're believing, A, is yours, or B, is as a true on an absolute level, like
Right.
none of it. Just
Yeah.
start there, if you're willing to, and
Mhm.
if they're not, just say, okay, well, let's just go bit by bit, and and deal with it. But so yeah, that was sort of the genesis of it.
When you've been doing that work yourself, I know this is a non-verbal experience, but what does it feel like to be on the right side where you're not conditioned?
I mean, people could even just check in with it right now. You could even sometimes I'm able to even access it in the moment where you just go, just drop belief. I mean, Scott has been saying for years, just rest as awareness, just rest, just drop thought and just rest. You know, and I do it, and other folks will do it, and it feels like home. It feels like what or who I am prior to the conditioning. What I was before all that stuff got dumped on me. By society or by parents or whatever, church or whatever. It's like come to that state. So it's sweet. It's like expansive. It's quiet most of the time. It's pretty quiet. And for me, sometimes I'll do visualization or something, and it looks like it'll be like a field to me. I'll just be like, oh, I'm in this field here. People show up there. Sometimes I think Aja showed up there before in the field. He's like, hey, he's like, told you, and
Right.
but that's the idea. Is it's just like just come back to your natural state, and that's what all those teachers that I mentioned earlier, Eckhart and them, say. Is it's like enlightenment isn't some spectacular, you know, woo woo spiritual thing. It's just coming back. It's returning back to who you are, who you were to begin with.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
the deprogramming is just the process of subtraction. It's to just remove all the stuff that isn't you, and then there you are.
Would you like to kind of talk about how that freedom and conditioning works in relation to the old model and the new model?
We call what's on the left the old model, right? We call that egoic consciousness the old model, which is in that consciousness is based, we found over and over again, on, of course, fear drives it all, but it's about rules. It's about external pressure, trying to impose my will on other people, or other people imposing their will on me. And it's what causes all the damage in the first place. What causes all the, like when parents are conditioned in that way by the old model, and they raise kids and they condition their kids with the old model. And it's not what they do. It's not exactly what they do. It is that too, but it's the energy with which it comes from, right? It's like it's coming from this. It's coming from pain, basically. We say when people, I'm sure everyone's experienced when someone feels like they put their pain on you, you know.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so that is sort of what we like to call the old model, and that's why in the new model of recovery, or in the new model of interaction of life or whatever, it's really no model. There's not a model. There's no beliefs. There's no rules. It's freedom, right? And
Yeah.
so it's sort of a misnomer to say it's the new model, because it's not. It's just the lack of that stuff. The lack of any,
That was the old conditioning. Right.
yeah, the lack of mind based and belief based, stuff. Which at this point is most stuff.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
you think about it like in the recovery world or in a lot of the clinical mental health, not all of it, but there's some stuff that's very, it's like, this is what this is, and you're diagnosed with this, and it means this about you, just like recovery world, you're an addict, you're this, So the dismantling of that is what we want to do with folks individually. We want to go in if the person's open to it because it's pretty radical. You're undoing a lot of what you've learned, or you're undoing this stuff, internally. And but if they want to, we'll do that little by little and um, inquire and just it frees the person up,
Right.
And I'm pretty free around sexual stuff now. I still have little things come up, little beliefs, around that,
Mhm.
but I'm pretty free. I'm trying to think of other areas that I'm still working with. Oh, guilt, right?
Mhm.
Guilt is like I'm doing something wrong, and guilt is like the anthem of the old model. It's also the currency of the old model. You know what I mean? It's like it's
Right.
what how people manipulate each other. And so that's been coming up a little bit for me, actually, because I'm trying to train on this work, and I'm trying to, move in this direction where I'm undoing the rules in myself and the old
Yeah.
beliefs. And like I said, people don't like it. I mean, you're rearranging the furniture. That we knew you this way, and you know, this was how you're supposed to be, and you're changing that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the trust that it must take. So, the way that most people look at recovery, and especially with something like heroin or a serious alcohol addiction, where people could die if they
Yes.
start reusing.
Yep.
So, what you're saying is you don't have to go by your conditioning. You don't have to, you can throw out the rules. We're going to trust that you can reuse maybe. And if you do, that you can come back. You're not going to be judged. You're going to be, we'll help you to kind of walk through that. So, what does that, I mean, in a way, some of the things that were coming to mind as you're talking about, well, that's not fair. I
Yeah.
white knuckled it to recovery. And it's not fair that somebody else just gets to go use. But
Yes.
still,
Yes.
there's a tremendous amount of trust in ourselves. So if we have a belief that we can't be trusted because we've had decades of experience that we keep reusing.
Yes.
Right? So it's not like it's a false belief. It's based on real evidence, real experience.
Yep.
How do you work with that? How do you get from there to freedom from those beliefs?
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. It's so much of, well, first of all, it is case sensitive with folks. Like if somebody has an addiction that's, they're on heroin, that's something that could kill them. It's like we'll take other measures to get them detoxed,
Right.
and, to just get them going with it and stuff. But it's like, if the person has that desire to do this, that's the key thing. It's like, do you want to do this? This is what it looks like. And do you
Right.
want to
It's not black and white in a way. It's
totally.
sensitive.
And,
Yeah.
and the other key piece though is that a lot of people, like I've heard folks say, well, that's just letting somebody do what they want. And that's what they were doing to begin with. And I go, no, it's not, because they weren't inquiring to begin with.
Right. That's the difference.
Do you know what I mean? It's like in the new model approach or whatever, you do what you want and then you inquire. You inquire before, during, and after the whole thing. If you have that the willingness to do that during. Sometimes during it's not easy.
Right. Right.
But the thing you said about self trust too, that's like, oh my god. I mean, I've done so much work around that. Like I said, that moment where I first started betraying myself and made that self betrayal is, it's so deep in so many folks, and so it's like to reverse that and to deprogram like the beliefs around that. Like we'll say to folks like, I can trust myself completely, just like I can have a drink whenever I want, right? I can trust myself completely, and their system goes, oh no, 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 because this and this, and this, you know,
Right.
words, pictures, beliefs come up, and so that's part of the deprogramming process too, is bringing the person back into that inherent like trust of self and sovereignty, whatever term you want to use,
Mm.
whatever got lost.
Right. So that statement, I can I can drink whenever I want, or I can trust myself, or all of those statements we say. So those are the reverse inquiries, and they're not affirmations. Can you just talk a little bit about the difference between those two things?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because they sound like they are affirmation.
Mhm.
Reverse inquiry is, it's a way, it's like a tool to elicit your programming, elicit your the beliefs, the painful beliefs, or the lack beliefs, or the ones that are keeping you stuck. So it's like picking a fight with the egos, is what Scott has said before. So
Mhm.
I'll say, if I'm somebody that can't trust myself, I'll say, well, I can trust myself totally, utterly, completely, at all times, and the
Right.
body, which is where all this stuff is, it's like, that's sort of the thing I found sort of tragic and hilarious about this thing, is that I think that I believe all this stuff. I'm like, well, I believe this and this and this. But then I'm like, oh my God, no, there's so much stuff down here that I have no idea that I even believe. It's the unconscious beliefs that are just packed into the,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. It's
you know,
shocking. Yeah.
right? And so if I say like, I can trust myself completely, and in my chest it goes, oof, and it like caves in. It's like, well, that's a no. That's a clear disagreement.
Right. Right.
And then it's mined out like, well, no, because that time when you were on the landing as a kid, and remember this, or remember that time that you used, and then somebody, you know left you, your girlfriend left you, or whatever it was, and so it's like,
Right.
that's the programming that gets, um, yeah, unearthed.
Yeah. And then we somehow have to develop a relationship with those parts of us that had those experiences. And back comes the unconditional acceptance and love. Because I mean, the addiction is so inherently disconnecting, as
Yes.
is trauma.
Yep.
So the difference, when you were talking about the difference, is you're not just using, you're inquiring. And then talk a little bit about the unconditional love part of it. What
Yeah.
is that?
Okay. Totally, because that's the piece that it's like, those aspects, the little kid aspect, or the it's like that's met with the awareness, with just unconditioned awareness, which is love. It's met with that experience of what's here on the right, like, just come here and just rest as this, and meet whatever is happening in the system with that.
So that connection, like with that kid inside.
Yes.
And he also, as the facilitator, you were talking about you would kind of slink back into the Kilby Center with your head down. And then Scott met you completely unconditionally loving and no judgment at all. That is not an experience that's common in our culture.
It was incredible. I mean, I told him a couple times, I was just like, I don't know where else I could have gone to deal with this. I'm sure there's some folks out there, but this is like unheard of. You know what I mean? Like, for there literally to be no judgment. And that's
Mhm.
why I'm working with folks and trying to train people in this now, because I want there to be more and more people that are able to hold that kind of space. And, you know, because the unconditional love is really no condition. You know what I mean? And it has to be
Mhm.
like, it has to be my experience of at least one other person doing that externally, and then they're helping me undo it internally, to where I don't have any conditions on myself anymore. You know,
Right. Yeah. Right.
and so I think that's why I get so jazzed about the deprogramming stuff, because it really is that, the progressive just undoing of conditions, which are beliefs, and pain driven the conditions, like over here in the old consciousness, it's pain driven. It's like, I need you to be this way, I need you to not do that. you know
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So we have experiences of being shamed, and then we begin to believe we are shameful. Experiences of not being loved and connected with, we believe we're unlovable. And
yeah.
so what we're doing is addressing those directly, bringing up the stored memories, experiences, stored trauma in our body. Very somatic. It's a somatic process of healing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard to do that when it's like, it reminds me of church. I remember it's like, when I was in church, or it was in even 12 step or whatever, it would be like, we or God or whatever loves you, Dan, unconditionally, but on this condition,
Right.
or in 12 step, it was like, well, you're accepted, and you're not judged, and we accept you, and they say, well, even if
Exactly.
you drink, you're still accepted, but everybody in the room, and so you can feel it. There's so much judgment and rules and stuff happening, so
Yeah.
so anyways,
Yeah.
and that's not everybody in 12. That's the, I mean, if
Mm.
if you're listening to this and you are in 12 step, you know what I'm talking about, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then you got to take into account that there's that, like, I didn't even know the amount of rules and conditions and stuff that I was putting on myself. I didn't even know. I kind of had this sense like,
Right.
man, I feel like I'm so hard on myself and attacking myself all the time. And that's the
Yeah.
thing I found with doing so much inquiry on that, is that that's not just happening for no reason.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, it's like that was taught or downloaded or programmed or whatever into me that I need to do this stuff, And so walking that back and reversing it is the idea.
Right. And a lot of that was helpful to keep us connected and attached to the people that we were counting on as we were growing up. And now it's created this cage.
A
Yeah.
100%, totally. Yeah, and it because a lot of those people, in my experience, I didn't even really like that much.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I was like, but I need them. I need to be around these folks that are suffering. I need to suffer with them,
Yeah.
and that's another angle that we'll take sometimes with folks if they don't have a drug addiction or alcohol or something that's real clear externally. Is it might be more common that that people are addicted to suffering and martyring themselves. I certainly was, and like
Mhm.
um, hurting themselves, on
Right.
some level.
Right. Right. So let's talk about the utility. That's another one of the cornerstones of the new Killaby inquiries. What's that, and how do people work with that? You get to a point where you can see it. Mm.
Yeah, utilities. That's my favorite one. When something's happening, if there's a habit or a pattern that keeps happening, like self judgment or other judgment, whatever, self attack, starting with the premise that that's not happening by itself. There's a driver there, right? It's not just like,
Mhm.
you know, that's just out there, And so the utility inquiry gets at what is the belief that is driving that, or what is the belief that, so for instance, I'd say as a reverse inquiry, like we were talking about earlier, I don't need to attack myself. And the
Mhm.
difference between reverse and the utility is that I don't need to, there's no payoff, there's no utility for attacking myself, right?
Oh, okay. Mhm.
And so in a way, it gets at the structure of ego versus the content of the ego. The content is what I find like in experiences, like on the landing when I was a kid. There's content. There's a memory there. There's content of the ego, right? The structure goes. I'd back out from that and go, okay, I don't need to betray myself, right? And then the body does the same thing. It'll go, oh, yes, I do. There'll be a pain here or a contraction or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then it's pretty amazing. It just gives you the information you need. It just goes, well, you need to betray and attack yourself so that some variation, usually it's some variation of approval, control, or safety,
Uh-huh. Right.
right? And it can be different. Like, I let the person customize. Like, they'll say, I need to be taken care of, or I need
Right.
to be connected, or whatever, But it's usually some variation of that, or if it's all three, we'll call it survival. Like if you
Yeah.
I need to, I mean, I did. I mean, in that experience on the landing, I needed to betray myself and go along with to survive. So there's the driver. There's that belief. That's the program.
Yeah. Right.
That's why I need to betray myself to survive, and I just bring that up into awareness and just watch
Right.
and inquire with that.
Things
Yeah,
that were true at one time. These are survival strategies. We reveal the conditioning, and then we reveal the strategy, and then the next step is to realize we don't need that anymore. Like what happens then once we see what the utility is?
I think it's just seen as long as it's brought into awareness over and over again.
Mhm.
I can't, it loses its power basically little by little. Sometimes it'll come back again, but I can go right to it and go, okay, what's the deal here? And the more I do this, the more I start to see, God, it really, I don't know if this doesn't sound, I hope this doesn't sound like dehumanizing or anything, but it really is, we're just like computers with these programs running, you know what I mean? And, and when they're running and we're not aware of them, they're in control of us. But if we just keep bringing them into awareness and seeing them,
Yeah.
I'll do that. Like the first time I did the inquiry on that, which I need to betray myself to survive, I just saw the thought and I went, my whole system just went, holy shit,
Mm,
and just,
yeah.
and then just came over here and just rested without the thought. And so,
Right. Right. Yeah. Wow. That's a powerful and it's simple in a way. There's the content is complicated
yeah,
and people's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
experience is different from each other. But it's really kind of a simple structure of we're conditioned, we have to maintain our connection with our family in order to live. So survival level threats and strategies. And then we look at it and see how conditioned and how controlled we are by that conditioning. And then we're able more to, from awareness, because it's scary to
Yeah,
go into the body and to look at our conditioning. And then who are we without our conditioning?
there it is.
How are we going to keep ourselves safe without our strategies?
God, yes, that's so. Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
I get chills when you say that. Actually, it's like, yeah, that's the anxiety around it. And I'll tell people like, easily the scariest thing I've ever done is this work, easily,
Mm,
and easily the most freeing and powerful thing I've ever done too. And coming into it, like on the front end, it's just the scariest thing ever. And then once you get in, and I'm sure you've experienced this when you facilitate
right.
people, but it's like once you get into it, you go, oh my God, not only is this not as horrific as I thought, but it can also kind of be fun. It's like, oh my God, like this strategy was in place and driving this thing that I've been doing for 20 years,
Yeah.
you know, and it starts to just settle.
Yeah.
So I like to try to have some, I mean, it's not like a real,
It's not like a
oh,
party.
this is awesome or anything, but it can be fun. Yeah.
There's a powerful reward, though. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So for people who want to know more about this, this is a whole new paradigm of recovery from trauma and addiction and of really recovering of deprogramming ourselves. So how can people get a hold of you? And in particular, if people are interested in training in this method, becoming a facilitator of this, and just talk a little bit about what you've got. And I know you and Scott are working on something right now. Why don't you talk about that too?
Yeah. We're working on a book actually about the whole process, and it's going to be called "Get with Deprogram: A New Model of Recovery from Suffering" is the name of it. So we're working on that, and that's also going to be sort of the name of the trainings that we're doing with people. It's the recovery field, but it's not just addiction like you think of them. It's like, yeah, that's why we call it recovery from suffering, which is anything that's mind or belief based. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anything that causes us to close down and suffer and stay in fear. And then we use addictions to compensate or to work with that to feel better. So if someone wants to do that training, what are their options?
They can email me, D McLintock. It's DMCLINTOCK 1980, the numbers, D McLintock 1980 at gmail.com. Yeah, and I'm doing mainly trainings. I do some sessions with folks right now, but mainly trying to do the trainings so that there can be more and more folks that are equipped to train other people.
And there is a lively community forming now of people who are facilitators of the Killaby inquiries.
Mhm.
So that's something that people could know too, that they have a group of people to practice with and connect with. And that there's a group that's doing this now.
Yeah, Killer Bee Inquiries on Facebook, and I think yeah, it's on Instagram as well. Yeah.
So what would you say to people who are kind of sitting here going, wow, it never occurred to me that I could do this deprogramming, or, I've been doing 12-step work for so long and I'm sober and but could this help me? Like, what would you say? I guess what I'm getting at too is there's so much suffering in the world right now. Is there hope that people can end the suffering and really enjoy their life?
I think I think so. I mean, I have, and I know other people that are doing it too, and it's like I definitely think so. And I think what I'd say to folks that are in a place like that is, if it feels like you're participating in your own diminishment, or you're keeping yourself small, or you have to follow rules in order to dot 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 whatever it is,
Mhm.
that's not, it's unnecessary. And that this work, the deprogramming, is empowerment. It's like it'll take all that stuff off, and all that weight and that pressure off progressively.
That's freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dan. The theme for the Radical Recovery Summit this year is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery. And what you're talking about, going from recovery from addiction to recovering from suffering, that really is a radical process that people can do. And I know from my own experience too, it's very possible. And I know from working with people that we all have that capacity. We can all look through this with the right tools and support. We can all come into awareness of ourselves and what's happening, and heal from all of these things that drive suffering. So that's a wonderful thing to know.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Oh, thank you. Welcome to the 2021 Radical Recovery Summit, presented by the Kilby Center for Recovery. This is Lynn Fraser, your moderator. This year, our theme is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery, featuring a diverse group of thought leaders and innovators, people who are working on the ground in the new field of addiction recovery. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to sign up and watch free.